Hello and welcome to Property Summit's essential viewing for landlords, investors and developers alike. I'm Emma Birchley and joining me today are 5 experts with bags of experience in the property world. Together they represent a property portfolio worth a whopping £1.5 billion. Now, Tony Gimple knows all there is to know about the private rental sector and is leading advisor when it comes to tax planning. John Howard also knows a thing or two about property, having bought and sold more than 3,500 houses, apartments and developments in the UK. I'm joined too by Nicholas Wallwork, another seasoned property developer and investor who is CEO of the world's largest international property forum. Finally, with me here in the studio is Richard Bush, founder of Crowdlords, which offers crowdfunding property investments across the UK. And of course, we mustn't forget property entrepreneur Paul Mahoney, joining us all the way from Australia, founder of Nova Financial Group, which provides property investment advice with a particular focus on buy-to-let. Well, today we're talking about permitted development. Now, this is something I don't know a lot about, but it's your bag, I understand, Nicholas.
Just a little bit, yeah. And I guess for the viewers, permitted development, PD, if we refer to it going forward, is everything from an extension of your house right through to larger commercial developments where you can convert and recycle old commercial buildings primarily. And there's lots of different facets to it, but ultimately, in simple terms, that's what it covers. And it's a much less restrictive planning process for developers and investors alike. So it's really welcomed in the industry.
And what difference does it make in terms of reusing buildings that otherwise might be going to rack and ruins?
I think it works twofold. A, it delivers more housing stock to the market, which is much needed. We all know we're not building enough homes in the UK. So in terms of the overall market, I think it's a real positive that there's extra stock being able to be delivered, usually by the smaller and medium-sized developers, not the major house builders. That's not their bag. They're building housing estates and huge amounts of homes. We like to get involved in recycling buildings. It's also a positive eco effect, if you like, whereas an office might be going to rack and ruin as an office, it can't compete with a grade A listed office for quality. Instead of spending hundreds of thousands of pounds getting it to that quality as an office, it can be probably more cost effectively refurbished into a block of flats.
And the rules have changed recently, haven't they?
The rules have changed a lot. Last year in September there was changes. There's more changes coming in July of this year, but they're all good changes. They're all positive. We've got this new Class E now, which is kind of an all-encompassing class, which covers PD changes back and forward between a lot of the use classes. So what that means is the use classes is a planning class, and it defines shops and restaurants will all be sort of A1 and A2 retail uses. You've got the C classes, which are all residential classes. You've got the D classes, which is dentists and doctors and surgeries and all these kind of places. They all now have various PD rights that allow you to do a certain amount of changes to put residential in place of them, and sometimes backwards and forwards. So it's very positive for the industry. It means that businesses can change use easier. It means we can get more residential property onto the market that might have been disused offices and other buildings that are disused and had problems. And with the pandemic, I think that's going to be really valuable. They've I don't know if they saw this coming. They can't have seen a pandemic coming, right? But certainly the pandemic is going to create a lot of extra commercial space that would have been going to rack and ruin with unfortunate, businesses that have gone bust and had difficulty. So I'm looking forward to seeing more stock come to the market. The first few years of this PD implementation delivered a lot of stock early, but it started to dry out. And the prices, when people realised what they had as office owners, prices were going through the roof. So actually the profit margins narrowed. And I think we're in a position now where there's still this sort of perceived market where we're in a difficult market, although the housing market has boomed. I think that's not necessarily the property development market. I think it's more the homeowners market has boomed, and that's what house prices have shown, homeowners moving and buying, taking advantage of the stamp duty holidays. The property developers market was difficult and has been difficult, but now with the pandemic, more stock coming to the market, I think there's opportunity for us investors in this industry right now.
Is that something you are hoping for?
I never realised I was an eco-warrior for the last 35 years. I've been converting offices to residential for 35 years. I never realised I was an eco-warrior.
I'm delighted. Now, John.
My stepdaughters will be even more proud of me than they already are. Hopefully.
Is it easier now, though?
It's a lot easier now. What I would say, and Nicholas is absolutely right what he said, but just a few cautious words I'm going to give, if I may. First of all, there's no permitted development in Wales, because I'm doing a conversion in Wales at the moment, so you have to go for full planning, and I think that's the same with Scotland. Of course, they don't vote Conservative in those two countries.
Why are you going up there then, John?
So it's interesting.
Then you get mobbed.
So they're not as keen to get on with all this as they should be, in my view. The other thing is, under the old permissive development, which we've got now, it's very simple to convert offices to residential. There's only two things anyone can hold you up on. The council, there are only two things the council can really stop it on. One is not having enough waste bins, and the other is cycle storage, have enough cycle racks. Now, those two things seem very simple for everyone, but they're not. Because if you've got no external space, where do you put the waste bins? And where do you put your cycle stores? So be careful. They're the two things that the council can stop you on. Under the new rules, where you can put an extra 2 floors on a block of flats, for instance, or a block of PD scheme, block of offices, put another 2 floors on, the rules are harder to get through. So they've got more reasons why they can turn you down, such as if the building doesn't look very nice, for instance, would be a very simple one they could stop you doing it on. So the new rules are great, and Class E is wonderful, but there are reasons, and there are reasons to be cautious about it. That's all I would really say.
To add before we move on, it's really important that those two things are really poignant, absolutely. There are more things that get considered now, and that seems that the council are adding more and more things as we go. As this PD gets more implemented,
and more sophisticated,
they're getting it. And again, this is where I get frustrated with the local authorities getting their grip on the planning process. They seem to be interpreting things themselves and adding extra things in for their regions. So
which is exactly what the government don't want.
Which
the
is what they
government
don't
wanted
want.
a really simple thing,
Yeah.
and it has been in the past up till now, but it is getting more complicated. And one last thing before, because Richard's, I know if you're funding these deals, the one other thing is, just because you can do it doesn't mean you always should. So if you're in an area where it's a very commercial area, but you can get the PD,
like an industrial estate or something.
You know, you may decide you don't want to do it anyway because you won't get funding from someone like Richard, or if he'll fund it to develop it, you won't get the building societies to lend to individual buyers at the end.
True, big risk.
Yeah.
What are the considerations for you then when you're looking at
Well, I
these?
think permitted development is great because you know that you can develop it and therefore you're safe to buy it. But like John says, there are so many things about many of these properties that don't make them ideal as residential properties. So we've seen many situations where people have purchased a building, they think they can convert into 30 flats, but when they get inside and they look at the structure and they look at various things like waste, they realise actually it's not that easy. So
and fire safety is a big one.
Fire safety is a really
to
good
bring
example.
these up to specs, really tricky sometimes.
So I think whilst it gives an impression that you will be able to get planning, it doesn't mean that it makes it a good development. And then the other thing that John mentioned, I think is the most important, is there's a lot of conversions, it might be 100 units, 120 units in a large office, that once they've been converted, people can't get mortgages on them because they're all bought by investors, and the mortgage companies don't want to be exposed to too many investors in one block. And often they're on the edge of a industrial estate, on the edge of an office park, and that's not necessarily where you want to buy your first flat or your second flat. So I think
just be careful is what we're saying.
permitted doesn't mean good. It just means permitted.
That's interesting. So you might have a block that's been developed, gorgeous flats inside, but and you might want number 17, but you can't get anyone to lend you the money to have it because the way it was financed was so complicated.
Yes, or what tends to happen is that there tends to be 100 investors in that one block.
I see, so it's multiples.
And
really.
lender A is already exposed to 18 of those, so he doesn't want to expose himself any further to more units in the same block, and it can be a real problem. And therefore the value drops significantly because people can't find a mortgage, and before you know it, it's not a profitable project.
Like everything, you know, position.
Yeah.
If it's in an industrial area, then, you know, I always look at this. Would I want my relatives, stepchildren, would I buy a flat for them to live there? And if the answer is no, and that's a good question to ask everyone who's investing and developing themselves, if the answer is no, why do you think someone else is going to? So I use that as a leveler, if you like, to see whether I should do a deal or not.
And the value you're going to get if it's not the right location is going to be lower than if it's in a better place near the bars or shops.
I think the important point that's coming out there from what everyone's saying is the most important thing is the end use. You know, John took the words out of my mouth. Just because you can convert it doesn't mean it should be converted. And you need to determine, what am I going to do with it after I've converted it? Am I going to keep it myself and rent it out? Or am I going to sell it off and Richard's very right as well. I've seen it happen before where, especially if it's not in a great location and it's in an ex-industrial park that's still sort of semi-converting to residential, lenders hate that sort of thing because there's no established market for rentability. So, buy-to-let lenders, especially if it's investor-led, just a little bit onto what Richard said there, some lenders are okay with developments that are fully investor-led. So they'll only lend up to a certain percentage on the site, and then they'll have to be spread across other lenders. Some are okay with that for, if it's a location they're comfortable will have demand in the rental market. But the location is absolutely key. And I have seen a lot of them that are kind of, off the fringe of a city in an area that, you wouldn't have walked down in the dark very long ago.
Absolutely.
And that's not where you want to be doing it.
And that goes back to my point. Well, if you don't want your family to live there, you'd be worried about your daughter living there, then you shouldn't be probably investing in it anyway.
But then, John, don't you think that a lot of the towns are going to change in use because of the pandemic and how we're going to, we no longer go to the shops as much and so on. And so the town will change, and that has to start somewhere. So until people start making use of permitted development, that town centre isn't going to revolve into what it needs.
Absolutely, and the town fund, this town fund that the government have got, I think, Tony, 40 odd towns across the UK, they've invested 25 million into this town. Ipswich, of course, is one of them. And interestingly enough, nearly every town, bar one or two, are Conservative seats. Isn't that funny? Isn't that strange?
Just coincidence.
Fancy, just a coincidence. But Tony, you from a tax point and an investment point, these towns are going to improve. They're going to almost become garden cities, if you like, within a city, or a garden village within a city, I think.
Oh, well, it comes back to the point we talked about in the first programme, the housing shortage, and just because you have permitted development doesn't mean to say, A, people will want to develop it. No. It's still going to meet all the building regs, and more to the point, if it's attracting younger families, where's the infrastructure? So you've got to have the doctors, the dentists, the
Schools.
parking, the schools. So take where I live on the south coast. We're literally within walking distance of the South Downs National Park, and yet there are no greenfield sites. It's entirely brownfield, and the biggest single, and Seaford is not a large town by any stretch of the imagination, and yet the biggest single objections are, well, we don't have enough doctors' surgeries, we don't have enough dentists, we don't have enough schools. So yes, you can build more under PD, but who's going to bring in
and
all
of
the
course,
other support services?
That makes a really good point, by the way. Under PD, under permissive development, you do not pay any social housing requirements, and you don't pay any community infrastructure levy, CIL it's called. So it really is a really easy way to get into property development if that's what you want to do. But it doesn't...
Provided you're not adding extra space.
Provided an extra space, yes, sorry. So that's a really big plus. But of course, for the more socially aware of us round this table, this area, and also Paul, who likes paying more tax than everyone else, you could argue that they ought to be a donation or a contribution to schools and to the infrastructure of the town. So, but under permissive development, there is not.
No, just quickly, they are starting to creep in these levies, shall we say. I've had a site recently where they've put in a SANG, which is I know it's an acronym, I apologise for that, but it is ultimately to do with the environmental areas, and you need to put, there's going to be more people coming to the area, more people walking their dog in the local park, so you need to provide more park and open space for those people. So you have to make contributions to the council to supply this kind of social space elsewhere. It's another form of the same thing. It's paying the council's Section 106 SIL, SANGs. It's creeping in.
But technically, there shouldn't be any with permissive development.
What difference has it made that there are now these minimum space standards? Obviously, if the person that's going to end up buying one of these properties, if you've got, you know that you're going to get a certain size, I think, what is it, 37 square metres for a one-bedroom flat with a shower room. Great for them, so good for the developers?
I think the idea of bringing in the national space standard into the PD market was a bad idea. I think the fundamental idea they wanted to achieve was to stop the unscrupulous developers building rabbit hutches for people and the low end of that market. I think 37 square metres is too high. I think they should have brought in a lower standard for PD to enable the PD sites. I want to hear Richard's view on this in a moment. He disagrees with me. Excellent. So I think I think it's important there's a space standard for PD, absolutely, because you can't be building 10 square metre rooms and renting those out. That's appalling, and that has gone on. So it needed some change. I think the minimum space standards at 37 square metres is too high. You know, something at 20, 25 square metres, well space designed in town centre locations is completely acceptable. You know, it's a really big, large sort of hotel suite
and it's
room.
the first step on the ladder for people, because you don't expect your first home necessarily to be very big, do you?
No, exactly.
Especially if you're in a town or a city.
People in their early 20s and sometimes early 30s need affordable accommodation. And we're not talking council affordable accommodation, we're talking professionals that need, and they want to own it, they don't want to rent it. You know, and what we're building primarily, as John touched upon recently, was the house builders are building, what was the percentage? The number of major house builders?
70% of houses
of the housing stock
in the UK are built by the 10 major house builders.
Right, so that's houses
yeah.
on housing estates. Yeah. Very little flats, and certainly no smaller flats. So there's a huge gap in the market for a well-designed micro studio, which might be 20 to 37 square metres, that range. They've cut that off.
But Emma, we don't know anyone who does those. No one at all here does those. Oh, hang on a minute.
So, not anymore.
Not anymore.
not anymore. Not anymore.
What do you think, Richard?
So, yeah, what do you think, Richard?
I can see that there's a market for rental at that level, but I just think to myself, how would I like to spend the last 12 months or 6 months locked down, or the last 12 months in a 37 square metre box? Without any outdoor space, without...
But that's a huge apartment, it's not a box. 37 square metres is a really good sized studio one-bed apartment.
But it's still small.
Okay, so let me put this to you. Would you rather be in a 6.5 square metre HMO bedroom, which is fully allowed by the regulations, or a 25 square metre fully self-contained, well-specced, well-space designed apartment of your own?
Or
near Reading.
Or an HMO of 6.5, 7 square metres, which is the minimum space standard for HMOs.
But that isn't the choice.
6.5.
It isn't a case of either you're in a 6 metre square.
It kind of is, because I believe there's a gap in the market in that area. You're either in a shared house, which we know is booming in the market because these young people need affordable accommodation to rent and live in.
I'd rather be in a shared house. I'd rather be in a shared space where I've got more than, it's just personally, than I've, a small box where I can reach out of my bed and turn the TV on and reach the other side and flush the lid.
I need to show you on my previous sites, because it's not like that. They're beautiful apartment space design.
And there are some people that are developing things that are not, they're not habitable.
Completely agree with that. I mean, it needs a minimum space standard.
But don't you think that's been done because there's such a demand for housing? You know, there's such a demand for housing, and of course, the bigger you make these units, the less units
you can deliver.
have.
Yeah.
And the government have actually shot themselves in the foot a little bit with it. I tend to, usually I don't tend to agree with Nicholas, but on this I think I do, where I think actually they've gone a bit over the top. That's typical politicians. They've had a load of grief, so they've gone over the top, and the truth is somewhere in between the two, probably.
They couldn't think for themselves. They just went, "What's the regulation we
you've had
currently
11
have?"
housing. You've had 11 housing ministers in 10 years.
Yeah.
So
that's the problem.
That is the problem.
If I can just weigh in, guys, I think it's all about the use of the space. You know, I'm sure Nick's small apartments are very well laid out, and therefore they may feel a lot bigger than they actually are. And so sometimes a 25 square metre flat could feel a lot nicer than a 50 square metre flat, depending on how the space is laid out and the spec and all that sort of thing. I was asked a question last week, is it better to invest in new build flats or conversions, which, quite often now are the permitted developments. And the answer is it depends on what conversion you're talking about, because You know, there are some great conversion. I own some converted flats, and they're, you know, in the Midlands and the North, where, you know, they look like the building where you guys currently are now. They're really nice old brick buildings that are being converted, and people like living in them. They're usually very spacious with high ceilings, all that sort of thing. And then you have, you know, 1960s fairly ugly office blocks that are being converted to residential, which probably shouldn't be. And quite often with permitted development, you can't touch the outside. So it still looks like a fairly unattractive 1960s office block. So yeah, there's a big scale there, desirability wise. And I think that's what it comes down to is, you know, the desirability to the end user.
We've mainly talked, haven't we, about office blocks being converted, but I guess there are more options than that. Where else can you go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I touched upon earlier other sort of use classes that have been developed and are being opened up to PD rights. So that can be doctor surgeries, all of those kind of classes, dentists, nurseries,
school nurseries.
Yeah, absolutely. Shops and retail, you're allowed to build stuff above and out the back now. You know, maybe shrinking the size of the retail, but having some residential mixed-use scheme created. So there's lots of opportunities right now.
Well, actually, it's on the doctors and dentist surgery type where there's going to be a huge potential. You know, there's very much a move for end-to-end healthcare, almost the Best Marigold Hotel type model, where you've got everything on the one site. Primary care, secondary care, tertiary care, pharmacy, you know, all of the services. So literally you can have, you know, proper care for an entire community. And so if you're looking to, you know, run a business based around, you know, healthcare, there are plenty of sites where you can get the tax breaks, the PD, and actually help, you know, in a relatively short term, make some of these older industrial conversions, you know, far more attractive to lenders, because people will want to live there. You know, it all comes down to having more space, more homes where people can live, whether it's owned, shared, rented, or some other variation on that theme. We still come back to the housing shortage and the NIMBYism that has pervaded society for a long time. So you have to look at the PD in the round and say, yeah, I can do it, but who's my end buyer going to be?
I mean, what I would say, Tony, like all these developments across the UK, be it conversion or new build or whatever, you know, there's good developers and there's developers that aren't so good. And there's areas that are better than others. And really, you just need to try keep the standards up, but keep things at an economic level so people can afford to buy them. And, you know, house builders and developers get knocked for, say, oh, well, it looks a bit cheap, this, that. Well, you know, it appeals to one section of the market that can't afford anymore. So that's got to be taken into account as well.
What's interesting is that the care home market hasn't been influenced really by the PD implementations much yet. No. And there's a lot of older care homes that are going to rack and ruin in the same way that the office have and other commercial buildings. I've
just managed to save one. So I just bought a nursing home to convert back into houses. So it's
yeah, they make great conversions.
So I'm doing my bit.
But they've not had the benefits of the PD rights yet.
No,
so
they haven't.
I'd like to see that come in because, as leading on from Tony's point, the care home market, which is a booming market with an ageing population, is in, you know, we need a lot of housing there as well. And what's being built is these ready-made, beautifully designed, brand new care homes, which is great for that market, but it leaves the older ones floundering.
But also a great opportunity for developers.
Yeah.
Great opportunity.
Well, thank you all very much. We are out of time. I've learnt an enormous amount about permitted development that I never knew I needed to know. But I feel much better informed now. So thank you ever so much. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for now. Until next time, bye-bye.